Isabella Monroe never imagined that the life she built with her millionaire husband, Nathan Monroe, would unravel into a nightmare. Pregnant with their first child, she basked in the luxury of high society galas, designer weekends, and the sprawling elegance of their Hamptons estate. From the outside, their marriage appeared flawless. A successful businessman and his adoring wife, expecting their first child. But beneath the polished surface, jealousy and greed festered in Nathan's heart. Then one morning, Isabella vanished without a trace. Whispers of betrayal and deceit spread like wildfire through their elite social circles. As the authorities searched for answers, a dark scheme began to emerge, one that suggested Nathan was not the grieving husband he appeared to be, but a man with everything to gain from his wife's disappearance. Was he plotting to seize her massive inheritance and replace her with his cunning mistress? Born and raised in a modest but loving home in Charleston, South Carolina, Isabella had always been admired for her kindness and resilience. Despite her humble beginnings, she earned a scholarship to an elite university and built a name for herself as a sought-after interior designer. Her eye for sophistication and the fortune she inherited from her late aunt in London placed her in the orbit of the country's wealthiest elite. It was at an exclusive New York charity gala that she first met Nathan Monroe, a self-made millionaire whose tech empire soared in the high-stakes corporate world. His confidence and charm were magnetic, and Isabella's quiet elegance balanced his commanding presence. The whispers were immediate. They were a perfect match. When Nathan proposed during a lavish vacation in Santorini, Isabella said yes without hesitation, believing their future would be filled with love and purpose. After the wedding, they settled into an extravagant estate with marble fountains, sweeping gardens, and oceanfront views. Despite his frequent jokes about merging finances, Isabella's fortune remained in her name, a decision she never questioned. Then she discovered she was pregnant. Nathan's joy seemed genuine, as he hosted a grand celebration for their friends. But Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that something in him had changed. If only she had known that the moment she became a pregnant wife, she also became a target. Isabella forced herself to believe Nathan's explanation. He laughed off the rumors, dismissing them as baseless gossip. "Juliana's just an investor. She's starting a charity, and I've been helping her," he said with a casual shrug, pressing a quick kiss to Isabella's forehead before returning to his office. His confidence should have reassured her, but something felt off. In the following weeks, the distance between them grew. Nathan's late nights became more frequent, his phone calls more secretive. If Isabella walked into a room, his conversation would cut off abruptly. When she asked questions, he grew impatient, brushing her off with excuses about work stress and demanding investors. She told herself she was overthinking. The baby kicked inside her, and she focused on the nursery, the one place where she still felt control. She spent hours choosing the softest blankets, the safest crib, the perfect mobile to soothe her child to sleep. Yet, even as she immersed herself in preparations, she couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her chest. One evening, as she lay in bed waiting for Nathan to come home, her phone buzzed. It was Victoria Dawson, her closest friend. "Isabella." Victoria's voice was hesitant. "I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but Nathan was seen last night. He was at a private event downtown, with her." Isabella gripped the phone. "With Juliana?" she whispered, her mouth dry. "Yes, and it wasn't just business. They looked close." A chill ran through Isabella's veins. She had spent months convincing herself that Nathan, her millionaire husband, was simply overwhelmed with work. But what if she had been wrong all along? That night, when Nathan finally came home, she confronted him. "I need the truth, Nathan. Are you seeing her?" His reaction was swift. A forced chuckle, a shake of his head. "Are you really listening to idle gossip now?" he scoffed. "I thought you knew better than that." But his eyes betrayed him. There was a flicker of something, annoyance, maybe even guilt. Isabella wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust the man she had built a life with. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered the truth. She was being lied to. And worse, she had no idea just how dangerous that lie would become. After all, a pregnant wife was more vulnerable than ever, especially when she was worth millions. Nathan's response was quick and dismissive. "I was just helping Juliana set up a nonprofit. nothing more. He pressed a kiss to Isabella's forehead, his smile easy, reassuring. Yet, something about it felt hollow. She wanted to believe him. But in the days that followed, her doubts only grew. Nathan became more guarded. His calls ended abruptly whenever she entered the room. Conversations that once flowed effortlessly were now clipped, his attention elsewhere. When Isabella mentioned finances, something they had always discussed openly, he brushed her off with vague answers. Even his affection changed. The little gestures she once adored, his morning kisses, his hand resting on her belly, the whispered excitement about their baby, had disappeared. In their place were impatient sighs, distracted nods, and offhand comments about how her late-night food cravings were costing a fortune. She tried to push the unease aside, focusing on the baby, but it was becoming impossible to ignore. One evening, she confided in Cassandra Brooks, a close friend she had known since college. "Maybe I'm just being paranoid," Isabella admitted, shifting uncomfortably. "It's probably just stress from work, right?" Cassandra's expression darkened. "Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is." Isabella forced a smile, unwilling to let her fears take over. She reminded herself that Nathan was her wealthy husband, a man she had trusted for years. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was happening right in front of her. The distance between them only widened in the following weeks. Nathan's once loving gestures vanished entirely. Late at night, Isabella would catch him pacing their balcony, murmuring into his phone. When she asked who he was speaking to, his tone turned sharp. "Business," he snapped, his voice leaving no room for more questions. Determined to focus on the baby, Isabella distracted herself with nursery plans, but the unease never faded. Then, one morning, a call from a law firm in London sent a chill down her spine. "We received inquiries regarding your inheritance," the lawyer explained. "Someone claiming to represent you requested changes to your estate structure." Isabella's heart pounded. "I never authorized that." The lawyer promised to send over the details, but the implications were already clear. That evening, Isabella confronted Nathan. "I got a strange call today," she said carefully. "From my aunt's estate lawyer. They said someone is trying to alter my inheritance." Nathan's jaw tightened, his grip on his glass tightening. For the first time, Isabella saw something flicker in his eyes, something cold, something calculating. And in that moment, she realized she was no longer just a pregnant wife. She was a target. Nathan's expression shifted for just a second, so quick that Isabella almost missed it. Then his face smoothed into practiced ease. "I may have asked about protecting our assets," he admitted, shrugging. "We're about to have a child. Doesn't it make sense for me to help manage things? Consolidating into a single trust is the smart thing to do." Isabella frowned. "But I never asked for that. Why wouldn't you discuss it with me first?" A tense silence stretched between them before Nathan forced out a short laugh. "God, Isabella, do I need permission to handle financial stability for our family?" He grabbed his jacket, shaking his head. "Fine, I'll back off." His voice was clipped, his movements sharp as he stormed out of the room. The door slammed, but Isabella remained frozen, unease pooling in her stomach. Later that night, she called Victoria. "I don't know what to think," Isabella admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would he try to change my inheritance behind my back?" Victoria sighed. "Men like Nathan, they don't like feeling outshined. He's a rich businessman, but your inheritance gives you something he can't control. That kind of power shift makes certain men insecure." She hesitated before adding, "Just be careful, Isa. Don't sign anything without reading every detail." Isabella reassured her that she wouldn't. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted. Just how far would Nathan go to secure control over her fortune? She didn't have to wait long to find out. 2 days later, an unexpected call brought her first solid clue. "Mrs. Monroe?" The voice on the other end was low and cautious. "This is David Callahan. I've worked security for your husband before. I thought you should know. People are talking." "Talking?" Isabella's pulse quickened. "There have been whispers about Nathan spending a lot of time with a woman named Juliana Kingston. Private dinners, hotel stays, not exactly business meetings." Isabella gripped the phone. "You sure?" "I can't confirm how deep it goes, but the frequency of their meetings is concerning." Isabella thanked him, but as soon as the call ended, she felt sick. The name matched the one from the rumors, the same woman Victoria had warned her about. Desperate for answers, she dug through Nathan's study that evening. Her hands trembled as she found an invoice, an expensive penthouse suite billed to his company. The guest listed? J. Kingston. And the dates? They matched the nights he had claimed to be out of town for business. A chill ran through her. She had spent months convincing herself she was just an overthinking pregnant wife. But now, the truth was staring her in the face, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. Isabella confronted Nathan that evening, gripping the printed hotel invoice in her trembling hands. "You lied to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She shoved the paper toward him. Nathan's jaw tightened as he glanced at the document. For a fleeting moment his expression faltered. Then, just as quickly, his face hardened. "So, you've been snooping through my things now?" His tone was icy. "Juliana was in town for business, and I offered to help. That's it. Why blow this out of proportion?" Isabella's heart pounded. "Because it doesn't add up, Nathan. You told me you were in Boston. But this," she gestured at the receipt, "proves you were here. With her." He scoffed, rubbing a hand over his face. "God, Isabella, you're being paranoid." Any other time she might have believed him, but too many pieces were falling into place. Victoria's warning, the law firm's call, and now this. It all painted a picture she could no longer ignore. The argument exploded into a shouting match, something they had never done before. Nathan stormed out, slamming the door behind him, leaving Isabella alone, her body shaking with anger and betrayal. As if sensing her distress, the baby kicked, and she instinctively cradled her belly. How had the man she loved become someone capable of such cruelty? She lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every warning sign she had ignored. Nathan had a mistress, and worse, he was desperate to access her fortune. But if only she had known that discovering the affair was just the beginning. The next morning, the estate was eerily quiet. The staff noticed Isabella's bed was untouched. No morning coffee request. No sign of her usual early walk along the garden paths. By midday, concern turned into panic. Fiona Marks, Isabella's personal assistant, tried calling her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Fiona hesitated before going to Nathan. "Sir, we can't find Mrs. Monroe." Nathan barely looked up from his laptop. "She was upset last night. Maybe she needed space. Have someone check the gardens." Hours passed. The entire estate was searched. No sign of Isabella. Her wallet remained untouched in her study. But her phone? Gone. By late afternoon, Fiona pressed Nathan again. This time, his casual demeanor cracked. Under mounting pressure, he finally called the police. When Detective Carmen Alvarez arrived, her sharp eyes scanned the estate before landing on Nathan. "Mr. Monroe," she said calmly, "your pregnant wife is missing, and I need you to tell me exactly what happened last night." Nathan exhaled, rubbing his temples. "We argued, that's all. She was emotional. I woke up and she was gone." But Detective Alvarez wasn't buying it, and deep inside Nathan knew his carefully laid plan was now under scrutiny. Detective Carmen Alvarez studied Nathan carefully, her sharp gaze cutting through his performance. "Your wife is pregnant, correct? It's highly unusual for a woman in her condition to disappear without a trace." Nathan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling heavily. "We had an argument last night. She was emotional. I'm afraid she might have left to clear her head." He sighed, his voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. "This isn't like her. Please, just find her." On the surface, his distress seemed real. But Alvarez noticed the lack of urgency in his movements, the calculated pauses in his words. Something was off. Behind the scenes, whispers spread among the staff. Isabella was deeply loved by those who worked in the estate. Her warmth and kindness had won them over. Fiona Marks, her personal assistant, couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She wouldn't just leave, Fiona confided in Victoria Dawson. She was excited about the baby. She had a doctor's appointment next week. She wouldn't miss that. Meanwhile, miles away, Michael Callahan, the private investigator who had warned Isabella about Nathan's infidelity, saw the news of her disappearance and felt a sinking dread. He had been suspicious of Nathan before, but now he was certain something sinister had happened. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the Monroe estate was bathed in eerie silence. Police cars patrolled the grounds, their headlights casting long shadows over the manicured gardens. Drones scanned the property's wooded outskirts, but there was no sign of Isabella. Inside the grand mansion, Nathan stood alone in the master bedroom, staring at his reflection in the ornate mirror. A slow, satisfied smile tugged at his lips. The plan had been set in motion. No one could prove anything yet, and as long as he played the role of the grieving husband, suspicion would stay at bay. The next morning, the investigation intensified. News of the missing heiress spread like wildfire, with media outlets seizing onto the scandal. Reporters camped outside the Monroe estate, cameras flashing, headlines questioning how a wealthy, pregnant woman could simply vanish. Alvarez returned for another round of questioning, this time pushing harder. "You said you argued last night," she stated, arms crossed. "Yet your staff said everything seemed normal at dinner. If there was a fight, why did no one hear it?" Nathan forced a thin smile. "We argued privately in her dressing room. I told the staff not to disturb us. We went to bed upset. That's all." He exhaled, feigning exhaustion. She must have left early this morning. But Alvarez wasn't convinced, and deep down, Nathan knew he was running out of time before the truth surfaced. Nathan's responses felt rehearsed, each word carefully chosen, but Detective Carmen Alvarez wasn't fooled. She had investigated enough cases to recognize when someone was performing rather than grieving. Something about his composure felt forced, and the deeper she dug, the more troubling details surfaced. Victoria Dawson, Isabella's best friend, didn't hesitate to set the record straight. Isabella would never just vanish, she insisted. Her unborn child meant everything to her. She had doctor's appointments lined up, the nursery nearly finished. This isn't a woman who was planning to disappear. A background check only deepened the detective's concerns. While Isabella's finances remained solid, Nathan's weren't. His investments had taken major hits, and if there was one undeniable fact in her line of work, it was that financial desperation could drive people to unthinkable acts. Then, a breakthrough. Michael Callahan, the private investigator, uncovered a hidden compartment in Isabella's study. Inside were documents that painted a chilling picture. A bank transfer, Nathan wiring a large sum to Juliana Kingston. A letter from Isabella's British lawyer confirming she had refused to change her inheritance trust. And finally, an unfinished note, scrawled in Isabella's elegant handwriting. "I'm afraid Nathan wants control of my money. Something isn't right." Michael took the documents straight to Detective Alvarez. "She knew," he said grimly. "She suspected he was planning something." Alvarez scanned the papers, her brows knitting together. "This is big," she muttered. But even with this evidence, there was no proof of what had actually happened to Isabella. Had she run to escape a growing threat, or had her billionaire husband ensured she'd never get the chance? Outside the Monroe estate, police intensified their search. The lake was dragged, the nearby forest combed, a public hotline was set up, and journalists swarmed the gates, snapping photos of a somber-looking Nathan pleading for his wife's safe return. Behind closed doors, though, he wasn't so composed. Across town, in a luxurious penthouse, Juliana Kingston sipped wine, her fingers drumming against the glass. The excitement of her affair with Nathan, the lavish gifts, the extravagant weekends, had soured under the weight of Isabella's disappearance. This was no longer thrilling, it was dangerous. Nathan arrived, slipping through the back entrance to avoid cameras. His frustration was evident as he paced in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. "The police won't let up," he muttered. "Alvarez is watching my every move. My phone won't stop ringing." Juliana crossed her legs, arching a brow. "Then maybe you should have been more careful." Nathan shot her a glare. He was losing control, and when a man like him started feeling desperate, things only got more dangerous. Juliana leaned back against the plush leather couch, swirling the wine in her glass. "I never signed up for this kind of mess," she muttered. Nathan turned sharply, eyes flashing. "What do you mean by that?" His voice was dangerously low. She met his stare, unflinching. "People are talking, Nathan. Isabella didn't leave a note. No phone call. She's pregnant. Do you know how bad this looks?" Nathan exhaled, dragging a hand through his hair. "We just need to stay calm. She's gone. The estate will eventually declare her absent or dead, and the trust will revert to me. Then we move forward." Juliana's lips pressed into a thin line. "And how long will that take? I'm not going to sit in the shadows for months while you handle this." A muscle twitched in Nathan's jaw. "So you want out?" She shrugged, feigning indifference. "Not necessarily, but I want guarantees. If I'm risking my future for you, I expect my fair share. Once the Monroe fortune is ours, I want something concrete." Nathan stepped closer, forcing a smile. "Of course, my love. Once I have legal claim to her assets, I'll make sure you're taken care of. But for now, we have to keep up appearances." Juliana studied him carefully. He was cunning, but also desperate. If this went south, she had no intention of going down with him. They clinked glasses in a silent pact, but beneath the surface, both were already calculating their next moves. Days passed with no sign of Isabella. The media frenzy intensified. Reporters staked out the Monroe estate, while socialites whispered theories about her disappearance. Some claimed she had run away from a failing marriage, while others speculated that her millionaire husband's mistress had something to do with it. Detective Carmen Alvarez grew increasingly convinced foul play was involved, but without a smoking gun, her hands were tied. Victoria Dawson wasn't willing to sit back and wait. She had known Isabella for years and refused to believe she would abandon her unborn child. Late one evening, she reached out to Michael Callahan. "We both care about Isa," she said, voice firm. "The police are following procedure, but we need to move faster." Michael hesitated before nodding. "Agreed. If Nathan did something, we need to prove it before he covers his tracks." Unbeknownst to them, time was running out. If Isabella was still alive, they needed to find her before it was too late. Victoria tightened her grip on her coffee mug, her mind racing. "The police are limited by protocol," she said, "but we can dig deeper." Michael nodded, impressed by her determination. "I've already looked into financial records, but we need more. Let's find out who else might have noticed something." Working in quiet secrecy, they started reaching out to Isabella's inner circle. Cassandra Brooks, Isabella's longtime friend from design school, was the first to provide insight. She was worried, Cassandra admitted. Nathan kept pushing her to put her inheritance into a joint trust. She refused. I could tell she felt cornered. Then they spoke with Fiona Marks, Isabella's assistant. Fiona hesitated before revealing what she had found. "The morning after she vanished, I checked her planner," she said, flipping through the pages. She had an entry for 9 a.m., meeting with R.E. Suspicious Doc. Michael's brow furrowed. "R.E., I never scheduled a meeting with her." "Could it be someone else?" Victoria wondered. "A lawyer? Someone she trusted?" The incomplete note sent a chill down Michael's spine. If Isabella had planned to meet someone about something suspicious, it meant she had found a direct threat, one she didn't get the chance to escape from. They studied the details again. If Isabella had truly run away, why had she left her wallet behind? Why was her phone missing, yet the nursery half-finished? Nothing pointed to a woman planning to leave her unborn child behind. Victoria met Michael's gaze. "We won't let the truth stay buried," she said firmly. What neither of them realized was that their search for answers would lead them straight into danger. That night, the Monroe estate was eerily silent. The moon cast a cold glow over the sprawling gardens, illuminating winding paths and carefully manicured hedges. The place should have felt peaceful, but instead, it crackled with tension. Inside, Nathan stood by the window, staring out at the empty driveway. His wealthy businessman facade was slipping. The police were still circling, the media wouldn't back down, and Victoria and Michael were asking too many questions. He exhaled, pressing a hand to his temple. He had gone too far to let it all fall apart now. Upstairs, Isabella's closet remained untouched. Her dresses still neatly hung as if she would return at any moment. But Nathan knew better. His pregnant wife wasn't coming back. Not unless someone found her first. Victoria and Michael stood near the side entrance of the Monroe estate, their breath visible in the crisp night air. A dim security light flickered above them, casting long shadows across the stone pathway. They exchanged a glance, hearts pounding. Breaking into a billionaire's mansion wasn't exactly in their skill set, but the police had combed the estate and found nothing. If there were answers about Isabella's disappearance, they had to find them on their own. Dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, Michael wore a black jacket and jeans, while Victoria had opted for a hooded sweatshirt and sneakers to minimize noise. Neither had experience in covert operations, but their determination outweighed their fear. Michael knelt by the lock, working it carefully. "Keep your flashlight low," he whispered. "We don't want security noticing movement." Victoria nodded, gripping the small flashlight with trembling fingers. The last time she had spoken to Isabella, there had been something in her friend's voice, an edge of fear she hadn't recognized for what it was. And now, she was gone. Pregnant. Possibly in grave danger. The lock clicked open. Michael pushed the door gently, and they slipped inside. The mansion's grandeur felt suffocating in the darkness. The vast marble floors, towering columns, and gilded chandeliers loomed like silent witnesses to whatever secrets Nathan was hiding. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, casting restless shadows that swayed with the wind. Every creak of the floor made Victoria's pulse jump. If Nathan caught them, they had no way of explaining why they were there. Their destination was Isabella's private study, a small, elegant space where she handled her affairs separately from her husband. The police had already searched it, but Victoria suspected Isabella had hidden something important. Michael gestured for her to stand watch while he carefully pulled open drawers in her antique desk. "They found some paperwork in here," he murmured, "but nothing conclusive." Victoria kept her eyes on the hallway, her nerves on edge. The scent of Isabella's favorite floral candles still lingered in the air, making her absence feel even more haunting. Michael pressed along the inside of the desk, testing for hidden compartments. "There has to be something," he muttered. Then, a soft click. A panel in the desk shifted slightly. Victoria turned, her heart hammering as Michael carefully pried it open. Inside was a stack of documents, and at the very top, a letter written in Isabella's own hand. "If something happens to me, it's Nathan. He wants control of everything. I know too much." Victoria's breath caught. Their worst fears had just been confirmed. Nathan's pregnant wife had known she was in danger. Michael ran his fingers along the edges of the desk, pressing gently against the wood, searching for any hidden compartments. Next to him, Victoria scanned the bookshelves, her flashlight casting faint beams across rows of neatly arranged titles on architecture and interior design. Then something caught her eye. Behind a decorative vase, tucked carefully out of sight, was an old leather-bound notebook. The cover was scuffed, the corners worn from handling. Her breath hitched. Could this be important? With steady hands, she pulled it free, flipping it open. The handwriting was unmistakable. Isabella's elegant script filled the pages, chronicling the days leading up to her disappearance. Victoria's pulse quickened as she skimmed the entries. "Nathan is pushing me about the trust again. I keep refusing. Something is terribly wrong." She swallowed hard. Page after page detailed Isabella's growing fears. Mentions of hushed phone calls, secretive behavior, and most chilling of all, Juliana. Then, the final entry stopped her cold. "If anything happens to me, it's Nathan. I know too much. I need to tell someone, but I don't have proof." A shiver coursed through Victoria's spine. "Michael," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She knew. Michael rushed to her side, shining the flashlight over the page. His jaw tightened as he read the damning words. "We have to get this to Alvarez immediately." He carefully slid the diary into a protective folder he had brought, ensuring it remained untouched for fingerprint analysis. Then, the sound of a light switch clicking echoed from the hallway. Victoria's breath stalled. Someone was awake. A sliver of light flooded part of the corridor. Footsteps approached, measured, deliberate. Then, a voice rumbled, low and irritated. "Nathan." Michael reacted instantly, flicking off the flashlight. Both of them pressed themselves against the wall, hearts pounding. Through the small gap in the study's partially open door, Victoria saw him pacing, phone in hand. "I don't care what they're saying," he muttered, his voice sharp. "As long as they don't find anything, I'll get control of everything soon." Michael shot Victoria a tense glance. If Nathan, a billionaire husband, was this confident, it meant he believed he had covered his tracks. Victoria's fingers curled into fists. He had underestimated them, but now they had proof, and Isabella's pregnant wife warning wasn't going to be ignored. Michael and Victoria remained frozen, barely daring to breathe as they listened to Nathan's low, urgent voice. "Just stay quiet," he muttered into his phone. "Nobody's found her. The cops have nothing but speculation. We're almost in the clear." Victoria's stomach twisted. He knew. He knew exactly where Isabella was, or worse, what had happened to her. Michael clenched his fists, silently signaling for them to remain hidden. They couldn't risk being caught now. All that matters is the trust eventually reverts to me, Nathan continued. I'll handle any doubts. The police can't prove anything. Just don't contact me again until it's finalized. A moment later, the light switched off. His footsteps faded down the hallway, swallowed by the silence of the house. Michael and Victoria waited an agonizing minute before slipping out of their hiding spot. They moved swiftly along the perimeter halls, avoiding any stray beams of security lighting. Once outside, they gulped in the cool night air, their relief tempered by the horrifying confirmation of what they had just heard. Victoria clutched the diary to her chest, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't let him get away with this." Michael nodded grimly. "We need to get this to Alvarez. If she can use this as evidence, we can finally take him down." As they sped off into the night, a mixture of triumph and dread filled the air. They had proof now, but with each passing hour, Isabella's life and the fate of her unborn child hung in the balance. While police scrutiny surrounded the Monroe estate miles away, Isabella stirred. Her head pounded. A dull ache throbbed at the back of her neck, her limbs heavy with exhaustion. Blinking against the dim light, she took in her surroundings. A small, sparsely furnished room. A simple bed. White walls, bare except for a single window, one that was bolted shut. This was not her home. Panic surged through her as she struggled to sit up. She swayed, gripping the thin blanket as nausea rolled through her. What had happened? The last thing she remembered was confronting Nathan about the forged inheritance documents. His face had darkened, his voice dangerously calm. And then, nothing. Now trapped in this unfamiliar place, one thing was terrifyingly clear. Her wealthy husband had orchestrated this. And as a pregnant wife, she was now worth more missing than alive. Then, darkness. Had she been drugged? Isabella's head throbbed, and the room around her blurred as she struggled to focus. A door creaked open. Instead of Nathan, a tall, broad-shouldered man entered, carrying a tray of food. His expression was unreadable as he set it on a small wooden table. She tensed. "Where am I? What's happening?" The man avoided her gaze. "You're safe for now," he said flatly. "I've been instructed to keep you here." Her pulse pounded. Under whose instructions? His silence told her everything. Nathan. Fear stabbed through her chest. She placed a protective hand over her belly, tears stinging her eyes. "He can't do this. I'm pregnant. Please, I need a doctor." The man, whoever he was, hesitated. "You'll get medical care if necessary. Until then, I can't let you leave. Don't make this harder." His voice softened, almost regretful. "The man's paying me a fortune." Isabella sank onto the bed, horror washing over her. She was a prisoner. But as she studied his face, she saw something. Hesitation. He wasn't completely on board with this. "You're locking me away so he can steal my inheritance?" she pressed, her voice shaking. "That's monstrous. I could be your sister, your daughter? Do you have no conscience?" His jaw tightened, and for a fleeting moment, sympathy flickered in his eyes. But then, just as quickly, it vanished. "I do what I'm paid to do." With that, he stepped out, locking the door behind him. Isabella's heart pounded as she stared at the closed door. Panic threatened to consume her, but she forced herself to breathe. She had to think. There were no phones, no windows. Wherever this place was, it was remote. A safe house Nathan had arranged, no doubt. But she wasn't giving up. If she could outsmart her captor, find a weakness, any weakness, she might have a chance to escape. Early the next morning, Michael Callahan and Victoria Dawson met with Detective Carmen Alvarez at the police station. The tension between them was thick as they handed over Isabella's diary. Alvarez flipped through the pages, her frown deepening with each entry. The personal account painted a harrowing picture of a woman who had feared her husband's intentions. Then one passage stopped her cold. "He wants to revise my inheritance trust. I suspect forgery. If I disappear, he's to blame." Alvarez let out a slow breath. "This is major evidence," she murmured. Victoria's hands curled into fists. "We need to act fast, especially if Nathan's millionaire's mistress is involved. Who knows how deep this goes?" Alvarez closed the diary. "We're about to find out." Somewhere, Isabella's pregnant wife warning was waiting to be proven right. Michael leaned forward, his jaw tight. "Nathan was on the phone last night, talking about how no one can prove anything. He practically admitted to orchestrating this." Detective Carmen Alvarez nodded. That's enough to escalate the investigation and request a warrant, but we still don't have direct evidence of a crime. If Isabella is alive, we need to figure out where he's keeping her." Michael's eyes darkened. "With the amount of money at stake, I'd bet he has her hidden somewhere. This isn't a normal missing person case." He brought up a name, Thomas Garcia, a man rumored to handle discrete problems for the city's elite. If Nathan had hired someone to make Isabella disappear, Garcia was the kind of man who could do it. Alvarez wasted no time. She secured a court order for Nathan's phone records, financial statements, and any properties he owned outside the city. If he had a safe house, they were going to find it. She also called Juliana Kingston in for questioning, suspecting the wealthy husband's secret mistress knew more than she was admitting. That afternoon, a search team arrived at the Monroe estate, catching Nathan in the middle of a video conference, his face twisted with fury. "This is harassment," he barked, slamming his laptop shut. "I have the best attorneys in the state. You can't just storm in here." Alvarez held up the judge's signed order. "We have every legal right, Mr. Nathan Monroe." Across town, Juliana arrived at the station with an expensive lawyer, her demeanor composed. "I only know Isabella from charity events," she said sweetly. "This whole situation is tragic." But behind the scenes, investigators uncovered suspicious financial transfers from Nathan's company to an offshore account. Even more damning, recent calls to Thomas Garcia. While not definitive proof, the puzzle pieces were falling into place. Meanwhile, in the secluded cottage that had become her prison, Isabella endured long, silent hours. Thomas brought her simple meals, allowing her short walks in a fenced yard, always under his watchful gaze. She had tried appealing to his conscience. "I need prenatal care," she pleaded, hands protectively cradling her stomach. Each time, his response was the same, a vague grunt avoiding her eyes. Isabella refused to give up. She had been silent for too long. A pregnant wife was supposed to be cherished, protected, but Nathan had made her a prisoner, and she would do whatever it took to escape. Isabella forced herself to stay calm, despite the suffocating fear that lurked beneath the surface. During her brief, supervised walks outside, she took in every detail: the dense pine trees, the narrow dirt road, the old, sagging barn in the distance. At dusk, faint headlights flickered past the tree line, hinting at a nearby highway or rural road. She committed it all to memory, desperate for any possible way to escape. Did the police think she had left on her own? Had Victoria and Michael given up, believing Nathan's lies? No, she refused to believe that. They wouldn't stop until the truth surfaced. One afternoon, a new person appeared, a woman in her late 40s, dressed in scrubs. "I'm Paula Maxwell, a nurse," she said, setting down a medical bag. "Nathan hired me to check on you." Paula performed a quick examination, feeling Isabella's stomach and checking her vitals. Then she stepped aside to make a call. "Mother and baby are stable," she reported in a hushed voice. "She's around 28 weeks, no complications, but she needs more vitamins." Isabella's heart pounded. This was her chance. She grabbed Paula's wrist and whispered, "Help me. He kidnapped me." Paula stiffened, her eyes flicking to the door before she pressed a finger to her lips. "I can't," she murmured, quickly packing her bag. And just like that, the fragile hope Isabella had clung to shattered. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She thought back to the day she told Nathan she was pregnant. He had lifted her in his arms, spinning her around in excitement. How had that moment turned into this nightmare? She fought against the tears, reminding herself she had to be strong for her baby. She needed a plan, and she needed it soon. Miles away, in her penthouse, Juliana Kingston paced, arms crossed. "This is taking too long," she snapped. "You said it would be simple. Make her disappear, and that's it. Now the police are tearing into your finances and I'm at risk." Nathan exhaled sharply. "It's almost done. Once my lawyers declare Isabella legally absent, I'll claim the inheritance. Then we disappear. You just need to be patient." But patience was running thin. And as Isabella's determination grew, so did the investigation's momentum. That evening, Detective Alvarez's team uncovered a property deed linked to Nathan. It was a remote cabin, purchased under a shell corporation. But the money trail led right back to him, evidence that could finally expose the billionaire husband's scheme. Somewhere in that cabin, Isabella was waiting, and time was running out. The discovery of Nathan's remote property, combined with phone records linking him to Thomas Garcia, sent a jolt of urgency through the investigation. Victoria Dawson and Michael Callahan refused to stay on the sidelines. "She might be there," Victoria insisted. "We have to act fast. She's in her third trimester. Her health could be in danger." Detective Carmen Alvarez nodded grimly. "We go in at dawn. No warnings. If Nathan suspects anything, he'll either move her or worse." As the first light of morning bled through the trees, unmarked police vehicles crept down a dirt path, their headlights slicing through the mist. Nestled among towering pines sat an unassuming cabin, its faded exterior offering no hint of the dark secret inside. Victoria and Michael waited in a separate car, tense and silent, as the SWAT team advanced. Inside the cabin, Isabella awoke to the sound of barking dogs and frantic shouts. The door burst open, and Thomas rushed in, gun in hand. "Stay put," he barked, eyes wild with panic. Isabella's pulse pounded. This was it. This was her chance. She kept her expression calm, watching as he paced. Outside, voices bellowed. "Police! Open up!" A beat of silence, then chaos. Thomas lunged for the door, trying to block it, but the police battered it down. A short, intense standoff followed, ending with Thomas hurling his gun aside and falling to his knees. Isabella gasped, tears blurring her vision. "I'm here!" Armed officers flooded the room, confirming it was secure. Then, through the blur of movement and radio chatter, a familiar face appeared. Detective Alvarez. Relief crashed over Isabella, and she broke into uncontrollable sobs. "He kept me here," she choked out. "Nathan, he arranged it." A medic rushed in, checking her vitals. Outside, Victoria and Michael sprinted toward the ambulance, their faces etched with emotion. They reached for her, their hands trembling. "We never stopped searching," Victoria whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. Isabella gripped their hands tightly, overcome with gratitude. "I knew you'd come," she sobbed. She was free. But the fight wasn't over. Nathan had orchestrated this entire nightmare, plotting to erase his pregnant wife to steal her fortune. Now, the only question was, could justice be served before he disappeared for good? News of Isabella's rescue spread fast, shaking the city. But Nathan Monroe wasn't a man who gave up easily, and he still had cards left to play. The media exploded with the shocking revelation. A wealthy pregnant woman, kidnapped and held in a remote cabin, rescued just in time. The story gripped the nation, fueling speculation and outrage. Detective Carmen Alvarez wasted no time securing an arrest warrant for Nathan Monroe. But when officers raided his Greenwich mansion, it was already too late. Nathan had disappeared. His staff, caught off guard, reported that he had grabbed a suitcase and fled in a black SUV just hours before. Whether he had been tipped off by Thomas or anticipated the net closing around him, one thing was certain: he wasn't planning to stick around. Alvarez immediately issued a statewide APB. The hunt for Nathan Monroe had begun. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Isabella remained under observation, both for her physical recovery and the stress of the ordeal. She gave a full statement, recounting how Nathan had confronted her over the inheritance trust. When she refused to sign it over, he drugged her. She woke up in the cabin, under guard. The plan had been simple: keep her hidden long enough for her inheritance to revert to him. This wasn't just betrayal. It was calculated cruelty. Adding another layer to the mystery, Juliana Kingston had also vanished. Investigators suspected Nathan had either fled with his millionaire fugitive mistress or arranged for her to disappear separately, using forged passports and offshore accounts to cover their tracks. Despite her relief at being free, Isabella struggled to process the man she once loved turning into a monster. Her baby's due date loomed closer, and stress threatened her health. Yet she wasn't alone. Victoria and Michael stayed by her side, along with a team of medical professionals ensuring her and the baby's well-being. One evening, as she rested, Isabella's voice trembled as she admitted to Victoria, "I loved him once. I never thought he was capable of this. He would have let me rot in that cabin, just so he could take my money." Victoria squeezed her hand. "He manipulated you, Isa. No one blames you. You survived, and now we make sure he never gets the chance to hurt you again." As the national manhunt intensified, Isabella braced herself for the inevitable showdown. If Nathan attempted one last desperate move, she vowed to stand firm. Close to midnight, at a nearly deserted private airstrip in upstate New York, a shadowy figure emerged from a sleek black SUV. Nathan Monroe, disguised in a dark cap and plain clothes, hustled toward a waiting jet. He thought he was about to disappear, but his past was closing in fast. Nathan Monroe strode toward the waiting charter plane, his grip tightening on a sleek black duffel bag. Behind him, Juliana Kingston trailed nervously, clutching a designer carry-on, her lips pressed into a thin line. Their plan was simple: slip out of the country before the authorities closed in. But Detective Carmen Alvarez had anticipated this. Credit card transactions and flagged phone records had led them straight to the private airfield. Now, hidden behind the hangars, a SWAT team waited in silence, ready to strike. Nathan reached the stairs of the plane just as a commanding voice shattered the night. "Freeze! Police!" Floodlights blazed across the runway, illuminating the jet like a stage. Officers surged forward, weapons raised. Juliana screamed, dropping her bag. Nathan spun, eyes darting wildly. He was seconds away from bolting. Then Michael Callahan stepped forward, his voice steady. "It's over, Monroe. You have nowhere to run." Nathan's face twisted with rage. "You meddling fool," he spat, his gaze snapping to Juliana, who was now sobbing uncontrollably. "You promised you'd stand by me," he snarled. Tears streamed down her face. "This is insane, Nathan. I never wanted kidnapping, attempted murder, any of it. I'm done." Nathan's composure cracked. With a sudden burst of desperation, he turned and bolted behind the plane, possibly heading for a secondary escape vehicle. Alvarez didn't hesitate. "Go now." Officers pursued, closing in fast. Nathan sprinted across the tarmac, but within seconds he was tackled to the ground. His screams of defiance turned into curses as steel cuffs clamped around his wrists. Flashing cameras swarmed the airfield, capturing the downfall of a wealthy criminal who thought he was untouchable. Juliana, her hands trembling, raised them in surrender. "I only wanted to be with him, but not like this." Her voice broke as officers led her away on suspicion of conspiracy. The night air buzzed with the finality of it all. Hours later, in a quiet hospital room, Isabella received the news. Her breath left her in a shaky exhale. "It's over." Nathan Monroe, the man who had once vowed to love and protect her, was now facing charges of kidnapping, fraud, and attempted harm to both mother and child. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, peace settled over her. She was safe. She was free. 2 weeks later, Isabella sat in a rocking chair by a sunlit window in her new apartment. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to dream, not of fear, but of the beautiful life she and her baby would finally have. Her pregnant wife nightmare was finally over. The quiet suburb Isabella chose for her new home was nothing like the cold luxury of the Monroe estate. Here there were no towering gates, no sprawling ballrooms, just peace. A cozy home with sunlit windows and a garden where she could finally breathe. Sitting by the window, she gently cradled her belly, feeling the baby's strong kicks. The doctor had warned that stress could trigger early labor, but so far both mother and child remained stable. The legal battle that followed Nathan's capture was swift. Prosecutors unearthed overwhelming evidence, his carefully orchestrated plan to keep Isabella hidden until her inheritance defaulted to him, his forged documents, and financial transactions proving his intent to marry Juliana once the money was his. Nathan Monroe was charged with attempted murder, kidnapping, and grand larceny. Juliana Kingston, despite claiming ignorance, wasn't spared. The forged legal documents and offshore transfers tied her to the conspiracy. Isabella took the stand, recounting the terror of her captivity and the heartbreak of realizing the man she once loved had betrayed her in the cruelest way. The jury didn't hesitate. Nathan was sentenced to decades in prison. Juliana, while receiving a lighter sentence, still faced years behind bars. Justice had been served. But Isabella didn't celebrate the downfall of others. Instead, she felt relief. Her wealthy husband's betrayal had not destroyed her. Through it all, Victoria had been by her side, and Michael's unwavering support had given her strength. After the trial, Detective Alvarez made a rare personal visit. "Your courage made this possible," she said. "I wish you and your baby the best." With the nightmare finally behind her, Isabella looked toward the future. She refused to let bitterness consume her. Instead, she turned her pain into purpose, using a portion of her inheritance to create a foundation in her aunt's name, dedicated to helping victims of domestic abuse and financial manipulation. Then, one bright afternoon, Isabella felt the first signs of labor. Rushed to the hospital, she endured hours of pain, breathing through every contraction, focusing on the life she was about to bring into the world. And then, finally, a cry. A healthy baby boy was placed in her arms. Tears of triumph and healing filled her eyes as she whispered his name. James Caldwell Monroe. A new life, untouched by greed, betrayal, or fear. She had survived. 4 years later, the ocean breeze rolled through Isabella's balcony, carrying the scent of salt and blooming jasmine. She stood by the railing watching James play in the garden below. At 4 years old, he was full of life, laughing as he chased their golden retriever, his little feet kicking up sand from the coastal pathway. California had been the right choice. No whispers of her past, no reporters, no shadow of her billionaire ex-husband looming over her. She had rebuilt her life on her own terms. But despite everything, some wounds never fully healed. She still had nightmares sometimes. Flashes of a dark room, the sound of a locking door, the echo of Nathan's voice, smooth and deceptive. She had once been a pregnant wife, trapped in a nightmare of power and greed. Now, she was free. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to find Michael Callahan standing there, a bouquet of sunflowers in his hands. "Thought you might need a little color to brighten your day," he said with a grin. She laughed softly, letting him inside. "You bring flowers every time you visit, Michael. My house is practically a garden now. Just making sure you don't forget how much people care about you." He replied, his gaze lingering on her. Their friendship had deepened over the years. He had been her rock through the worst of it, checking in, helping her adjust to her new life. But lately, there was something unspoken between them. Something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. "Come on," she said, leading him to the backyard. "James has been asking about you all morning." Michael smiled, but as they walked outside, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that a new chapter was about to begin. One not defined by fear or survival, but by love. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready. Dear friends, so we've just experienced this story together. I want to pause here for a moment with you, to really sit with the emotions it brings, to reflect on what it means beyond just words on a screen. This isn't just a fictional tale. It's a reflection of real struggles, real betrayals, and real resilience. Life doesn't always unfold like a carefully written plot, but within every hardship, there's a lesson waiting to be understood. I didn't tell you this story to pass judgment on anyone, but rather to offer something for you to think about, something that might resonate deep within you. And if you're still here, still listening, then maybe this story was meant for you. Maybe there's a reason you didn't scroll past, a reason you stayed until the end. If that's the case, then I ask you to take a small action, subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who might need to hear this. There's a saying, if you want honey, don't destroy the hive. A bitter cucumber? Toss it away. Thorny blackberry bushes on your path? Walk around them. That's all you need to do, without asking, why do such things even exist in the world? That question would seem ridiculous to someone who studies nature, just as a carpenter or shoemaker would laugh if you questioned why their workshop had scraps of material on the floor. Those scraps are simply part of the process. They have a place where waste is discarded, but the universe as a whole has nowhere to throw anything away. It contains everything within itself. And the beauty of this grand craftsmanship is that it sets its own limits and renews itself. Everything that seems to decay, grow old, or lose its use eventually becomes something new again. In this way, life doesn't need anything beyond what already exists. It reshapes, repurposes, and reinvents itself within its own space, its own materials, and its own craft. So when you face something difficult, when life presents obstacles or pain, remember, not everything is meant to be questioned. Not everything needs to be fought. Some things are simply meant to be let go, walked around, or allowed to transform in their own time. Maybe this story was just that, a reminder that even in pain, there is renewal. And if you felt something today, if even one line of this story stayed with you, then you are meant to be here. Thank you for listening. I hope to see you again.